forms of energy, fossil fuel energy generation, and it needs to end immediately if we want to have,
I agree with
as you say,
100%,
we're already
Ken.
past the point, but at least we can ameliorate the damage at this point.
Absolutely. No, there's still time to save us. Like, we've got a very, very small window now, but there's still time. I want to say personally, thank you for shutting down that pipeline for a day. And thank you for risking your freedom for it. And thank you for loving your own children enough to do this.
Well, it wasn't, none of us did it for the fun of it. We did it because there really are a few alternatives. And I think that if you're looking at our kids' future, if you care about, global conditions, if you feel, as I do, very strongly that we need to consider the rights of other species and entire ecosystems, then I think it's incumbent on us to figure out what's the most effective thing that you can do. And I've tried all of the normal channels. I've spent 4 decades lobbying, litigating, doing public education, trying to convince opinion leaders and so forth. And those have availed us nothing. We've gotten nowhere. We really are at a point where I think people need to go out and take direct action and actually shut the things down. If we have a lot of people doing that, that might change the course of events, whereas talking about it has gotten us nowhere.
No, talking about it has gotten us nowhere. How can people get involved, Ken, and help you, both with the Legal Defense Fund, and how can they help you by getting involved in the movement to save ourselves from the climate emergency?
Well, they can help us directly by going to shutitdown.org, which is our support site, and also a place where you can get information about who's doing what. I think that, as I said earlier, I think it's a opportune time for people to think what is effective at this point. Under President Trump, given what we were facing, what kinds of things are effective? And I think that it's also time to hold the leadership and the institutional leaders of our environmental and climate movements accountable, because we've just failed. We've utterly, flatly failed after 20 years of work, spending a lot of time and a lot of money, and that we ought to start doing things quite differently. So I think I've been using the phrase, what we need from here is lawyers, love, and money. We absolutely need to start focusing on the legal system for reasons of defense, and also because it's potentially an effective route for raising the climate issue in a forum that requires, evidence as opposed to lies. So we need a lot more attention to the courts. We need lawyers to work on this, and we need, money in the sense of support for that. But I also think we need to approach this from a loving perspective, and love to me involves care for others and also a willingness to sacrifice. So that means people who are willing to put their potential liberty on the line in order to take effective action. So I urge people to go, if you want to do something, seek out organizations and groups, doesn't always have to be an organization, of folks who are coalescing all across the country to engage in direct action and do it on climate change. There's a lot of direct action happening out there, and a lot of it's incredibly valuable, and a lot of it's necessary. But I think we have to be careful that we don't end up doing a lot of direct action that leaves climate change out of the mix.
No, I couldn't agree more, and especially what you said about love. I mean, look, I'm a follower of Jesus Christ, so for me, this totally fits with his entire message. And you're following his example. And I'm so proud of you, Ken. And if I'm in jail with you too, man, in a month or two after I go out to Standing Rock, I got to say, if we all wind up going to jail for this, at least the company's going to be good.
That's what I'm thinking. Yeah, and if there's I'm embarrassed by people who are calling themselves Christians who have, voted and advocated, and obviously they haven't read the words printed in red in our Bibles. Um, but I think, there's a lot there to both inspire and also to hearten one as you face things like prison and jail.
Well,
So
Ken,
thank you.
what else can I tell people? I mean, I've still got about 5 or 6 more minutes. I mean, we can talk religion if you want, because for me, this is a religious calling. There's no other way to
Yeah,
look at it. Our world
it
and our families are in danger.
it is. I think it was nice that and sort of wryly humorous that Standing Rock in issuing its call to action in prayer said, we invite people to take action in prayer. We know that some of our supporters are atheists as well, so we don't necessarily require the prayer, but we do require the action. I think that's the way that we need to approach it. I think that ethical humanists also have, a whole set of ethical guidelines that call on you to look at what's going on and to not act entirely in your self-interest. And that's where we are at. We require more people to say, we're at a point where we're on the cusp of life as we know it, and we need to we need to be able to willing to sacrifice and take some risks, because otherwise we will continue in what amounts to a consensual public hallucination that there is no problem. So I don't know if that counts, but talking with
No,
about religion, but in general, I
that
think
idea
that's
of the
the
public
situation we're in.
hallucination, the idea of the public hallucination is so true. People spend on average, a television is on in the average American's household 6 to 8 hours a day. Their heads are being pumped full of poison at every commercial break in between the commercials by oil companies, agribusiness, and pharmaceutical companies, which are all tied together in like the troika of the hydrocarbon industry.
Absolutely.
And
I also think
it's
that people
blinded them.
haven't. Sorry.
No, go ahead, go ahead.
Well, I think that despite that, there is an underlying level of awareness and angst that something is seriously fucked up here, and that not everyone necessarily knows all the facts. And certainly, we have a hefty chunk of the population, around 25%, that just are going to refuse to believe they think it's all a hoax, and that somehow we're all making money off of this. That's my favorite part
Yeah.
of the hoax theory. If it is, I haven't seen any yet. But I think we have a higher level of angst and awareness than is necessarily appreciable in the polls. And I think that history tells us that small numbers of people acting, with acting with strength and with conviction are what is necessary to shift large swaths of the population. And that's what we need to do.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, we're in 100% agreement on all this stuff. We both, and I think most of our listeners too, already recognize the danger and the need. The time is now for collective, nonviolent action in a spirit of peace and brotherhood and solidarity with people we're all going to die if we don't do something.
Well, so specific things are support Standing Rock, support people doing climate direct action, engage in it yourself, support entities like the Climate Disobedience Center, the Civil Liberties Defense Center, and Standing Rock activism. And if you can, first of all, support with money and moral support, and second of all, support with your bodies if you can. Not everyone can. Our action, we had folks who were in their 20s and people who were in their 50s and 60s, and often that's who's is available to take higher risks. So all you grandparents out there, let's go.
No, I'm going out to Standing Rock. I get in probably night of December 3rd, and I'm staying through the 7th, and I'm going out there with about 500 veterans. And we're ready to get our asses kicked, beaten, thrown in jail, whatever. We're going to live, we're going to, walk in the steps of the people who came before us.
Excellent.
We're down.
For that.
This is the line in the sand, Ken, and we're with you, dude.
Thanks. So, I wish I could join you, but I got one or two things ahead of me that like trial and getting ready to go to trial. I'm slated to go to trial January 9th on 4 charges. that include sabotage, assemblage of saboteurs, burglary, and trespass. Two
Well,
of those first two are antique Washington laws, in essence, that were passed to shut down the Wobblies at the turn of the last century and are rarely seen. So, of all of the things that with all of the charges, I personally think an assemblage of saboteurs is the coolest.
well, as far as I'm concerned, you acted in self-defense for yourself and the rest of this nation, and I congratulate you, sir, and I admire your bravery, and I hope you're an example that millions of others will follow as they wake up to the reality of what we're facing. For TYT listeners, please get in touch with some of these groups. Give your money, give your time, give your body, because it's on the line. Thank you. For TYT Interviews, this is Wes Clark Jr. Have a great day. Welcome to Turks, you got a conspiracy. What is this?
Normally the beginning of a Friday show, but why not on a Thursday?
Yeah. Yeah. I just want to call Arthur out. Arthur is one of our lovely producers who helps me
Lovely?
get.
That's a questionable word for Arthur.
He's delightful. Arthur is delightful. Anyway, he helps me gather elements for my storytelling.
They have been gathered.
But it was funny because after I gave him all the articles that indicated which elements I needed for all the stories, he gave the printouts to John, and I was like, no.
No,
There's
I don't
a woman
think so.
in hour one today. So.
Sorry, Arthur. Sorry, and you just got called out. So
But you're still delightful.
Okay, take that up with your Corey. See how that goes.
I'm like, John, aren't you curious about the giant stack of news stories on your desk? And he's like, oh, I didn't even notice them.
Yeah. No wonder he's not in this hour. All right. Anyway, so we have a lot of stories for you guys throughout both hours. Not obviously, we're going to start with North Dakota Pipeline, although the rest of the press isn't covering it, so it's not obvious to them. I think the story about the sheriff out of Milwaukee is amazing. That guy should be in jail. And then what Steve Bannon said is hilarious in its patheticness. The only problem is he's actually got tremendous power in the country now. The Trump bots, we have information on them, and that is amazing. And then later in the show, I will be going off on the United Arab Emirates.
Yes.
Okay.
Me too.
I don't know if you guys know this, but we're against the United Arab Emirates, you dumbass. And then there's a story in here that I just found to be the most amazing story.
Was it a story that I found for the
Well, of course it was, Anna. Jeez and Lord mercy, what was it?
I don't know. We should get to the stories, though.
I know. This is totally unacceptable. All right, anyways. Hell of a show for you guys today.
Great at teasing.
I know, go.
All right. We start off with the Dakota Access Pipeline. The developers behind the Dakota Access Pipeline, otherwise known as DAPL, are pushing aggressively to finish construction of the pipeline. Now, in order to do so, they need a crucial easement for the pipeline to cross under the Mississippi River. Now, in order to do that, they need the necessary permits in which they do not have. However, in a push to finish the Dakota Access Pipeline, its developers claimed in a federal lawsuit Tuesday that they have all permits needed to complete the project and accused the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers of political interference to delay it. Now, what do they have against the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers? Well, the Corps has said it wants to consider further the concerns of the Standing Rock Sioux tribe that the pipeline poses grave risks to its water supply and sacred sites. Fair enough. They're just saying, look, we want to do, some proper examination to ensure these people don't have to end up dealing with tainted drinking water in the future. And of course, the developers behind the Access Pipeline are not happy about this.
Yeah, so I get it. Every day that they delay, they cost them a little bit of money, and money is their God. Mm-hmm. To them, that's what's sacred. And too bad they don't have the permit yet from the Army Corps of Engineers. But apparently they brought in the drills. They seem very certain that they're going to go forward. I get it. Trump won. But what drives me crazy about this story, and there are a lot of parts of it that are disturbing, is the reaction of the North Dakota officials and the cops. So even though drilling right now would mean that the company is breaking the law, and there are other good reasons to believe that they are on questionable legal grounds, they always assume that the peaceful protesters are the lawbreakers.
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And look, video after video shows that the protesters are there peacefully. They're not trying to cause problems. They're practicing their First Amendment rights in protesting the development of this pipeline. And they're met with rubber bullets. They're met with pepper spray. We have some more video evidence of that later on in this story. But our field reporter, Jordan Sheridan, wanted to touch base with, the
Army Corps of Engineers?
Yes, the Army Corps of Engineers, and kind of confirm what's going on. And so he emailed them and said the following: what is the Army Corps of Engineers, this is graphic 4, what is the Army Corps of Engineers' reaction to Energy Transfer Partners CEO telling PBS they will finish the pipeline despite lack of permits to do so? This comes after the company said on November 11th they have no choice but to finish despite the lack of drilling permits under the lake. Well, the Army Corps of Engineers responded and said, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers cannot speak for DAPL about their construction plans. The pipeline company has not been granted the easement by the Corps that is required before any horizontal drilling beneath federal lands at Lake Oahe can begin. So, again, there's some confirmation right there that they do not have the necessary permits, but they're still going to move forward with the construction without the proper permits.
Yet, Governor Dalrymple of North Dakota arises from his slumber and says that it is the protesters that are the rule breakers, and we must have law and order in our state. And then the Morton County Sheriff's Department says that he says, quote, this is about the rule of law. Our objective is to isolate unlawful actors from committing unlawful acts. Well, it appears there's a giant unlawful actor right behind you as you're facing the protesters and your sheriff's department officers are facing that way. Behind you, there's a CEO saying, I don't really care what this president says. I'm going to go forward anyway. But yet you don't seem to care about that. And that CEO is saying, hey, maybe I'll cover your costs, cops.
That's exactly right. Okay, so there's a financial component of it. There's, a financial component that encourages the cops to take some of the brutal actions that they've taken against the protesters. Now, going back to the CEO, Cenk, maybe the question now is, what will the ramifications be for the Energy Transfer Partners of Dallas, those are the developers behind the pipeline, if they move forward with the construction without the proper permits? Well, it seems like they're emboldened by the fact that Donald Trump is now our president-elect. In fact, Kelsey Warren has spoken about this and has specifically mentioned how, Donald Trump is his homeboy because he's invested in the project. So Trump is going to obviously profit from this as well. Let's go to video number 2.
We will get this easement and we will complete our project.
Energy Transfer Partners CEO Kelsey Warren is confident a Donald Trump presidency means his company's controversial Dakota Access Pipeline will be completed.
Once he takes over January 20th, what are the prospects?
Oh, it's 100%.
100% that
The easement gets granted and the pipeline gets built.
The president-elect has minor holdings in Warren's company, and Warren donated $103,000 to Trump's campaign.
Have you spoken to Donald Trump about the pipeline?
I've never met the man.
You've never met him?
No.
But he's invested in you and you're invested in him.
Well, I wish him well.
I bet you do. And he wishes you well because he's going to make money off of you. I believe that this is the kind of corruption that Donald Trump was talking about on the campaign trail.
Weird.
Huh.
Did he renege on his promises to end corruption?
So I like this guy. He's like, I'm 100% certain. Why? I gave him $100,000. He's got money in my company. What do you think? Of course I'm certain because I rigged it ahead of time. Crooked Donald, perhaps? Isn't it amazing that he's not putting the money in a blind trust? Right there, one of his first decisions is going to be ruling on a company that he has money in. Mm-hmm. Insanity. Well, I thought you were going to drain the swamp, Donald Trump. What happened? Looks like you're not draining the pipeline, the swamp, or anything else. All you're doing is taking money and put it in your pocket and crushing people in your path.
Now, while it's pretty clear that the developers are going to move forward with the Dakota Access Pipeline without the proper permits, the developers continue to blame the protesters for not following the law or for being violent, which is absolutely ridiculous. So let's go ahead and talk to or watch a report by Jordan Sheridan. This is video number 5, which shows what's happening with the cops and their actions against the protesters. Take a look.
The police here, as I've been saying, they are cleaning up. They're getting overtime. They're making all sorts of money, and the state of North Dakota, the government of North Dakota, recently got an additional grant of, I think, $4 million approximately to fund this militarized police force. And the police, essentially, it's a surveillance state. It's not only an attempt to intimidate, it's really an attempt to harass. There's no reason to have billy clubs out. There's no reason to have pepper spray out. But the police have essentially been allowed to operate with carte blanche by the governor here. And we should note that a lot of the prayers that the water protectors are doing.
Hey, sister, forget the wakichi. Hey, don't acknowledge it. Don't acknowledge him.
The gentleman across the street is saying, "Fuck you, terrorists," to the water protectors. And as you can see right here, the police are right behind me with looks like pepper spray canisters.
That's on the center, please. Veterans in the center.
Come on, please. Let's go. Nobody wants to get arrested.
Officer, what do you have the pepper spray for? Just curious. Yeah, they're not answering. So apparently there's a need for pepper spray in response to hundreds of peaceful protesters.
That woman holding the cross did look pretty intimidating.
Yeah. Who are the bad guys here? Like, I know a lot of you pro cops, pro corporations. Let's go multinational corporations. The CEO we heard from is worth $3.9 billion. Let's go billionaires, right? Right wing loves to protest in favor of those guys, apparently. But when you've got the stormtroopers out there, look, the cops are following orders. I know it's not always an excuse. It's the governor that's making the decisions and working with the corporations, et cetera. And they're middle-class guys, those cops. But I mean, when you put on the giant stormtrooper outfit and you've got your mask on and you've got all your weapons on and you see people with prayer sticks and crosses and stuff, and you feel good about that? Is that you're like, yes, let's go crush some peaceful protesters. I've got my stormtrooper mask on and I'm ready to go.
Yep.
Like, who looks like the good guys and the bad guys there? But they don't see it. They look at it and they go, those heavily militarized guys are protecting the peace.
Yeah.
And the peaceful protesters that are praying are the real problems in this country.
think about all of the various obstacles that stand in the way of these peaceful protesters. First of all, there's the issue of the media not covering this story. You don't see any coverage of it. Maybe a little tiny bit of a mention on some mainstream media outlets about it, but overall, there's no in-depth reporting on this issue. So that works against the peaceful protesters. At the same time, that allows those who are, part of these corporations to basically take hold of this narrative and spread this narrative that the protesters are violent and they're dangerous, and it just keeps getting, spread all over social media, and people just, they get turned into like these violent people when all they want to do is protect their drinking water. All they want to do is make sure that there are proper precautions taken and proper examinations taken before the construction is finished. And then finally, you also have the militarization of the police force intimidating the protesters from practicing their First Amendment rights. That's what's happening here.
Yeah, so Governor Dalrymple goes further, and he's blaming the federal government. As CEO Kelsey Warren says, hey, maybe I'll pay the cost that the cops have in North Dakota. That's his way of saying, hey, I already bribed Trump. Maybe I'll bribe you guys by giving you guys more money. And they're saying, well, we don't know if we'll accept that. But the governor says, but the real culprit here is the federal government, because it's partially responsible for costs incurred to maintain public safety because of its actions and inactions surrounding the pipeline project. Mm-hmm. In other words, if you just already approved what the corporation wanted, instead of worrying about if the thing is going to leak and it's going to destroy the water, whose land it is, who cares about any of that?
Yeah.
We got money to make, so I'm going to put it on President Obama for not immediately approving the permit, and I want my money for that.
So let's think about this in broader terms, because you as a citizen who might be a property owner has to go through so many obstacles just to make an addition to your home, right? You got to take out the proper permits. They got to make an examination. There's zoning laws. Every little thing that you want to do to your own property needs to be examined by the government. They have to approve it. But when it comes to a corporation dealing with something like oil, which we've had severe problems with in terms of, tainting our drinking water or leading to leaks in our oceans and all that stuff, it doesn't matter. We don't have to do the proper examinations to get these types of developments approved. They get to move forward because they have the resources and the campaign contributions on their side. They can go ahead and bribe any politician they want to get what they want approved without the proper tests in place.
So, and the rest of the media had the excuse of, there's a big, exciting election going on. I can't go out there and spend money in covering a protest in North Dakota. We have just one reporter in the field, and we sent him to North Dakota before the election anyway, okay? Because it's an important story. It involves so many different elements, right? So first of all, the Army Corps of Engineers might have broken the law by not preparing a full environmental impact statement. Then the Corps turns around and says, okay, look, but they're not allowed to drill. Then the company says, I'm going to drill anyway. Unbelievable defiance. And then they're crushing these protesters. And then there's video, we've got it on video, of an instigator who comes in with a rifle among the protesters. They never found any weapons among the protesters ever. The only guy they find, it turns out, is working for the Dakota Access Pipeline. And he's got ID from them, his car's insured by them, etc. But yet the press is like, well, I see no problems here. No, I can't be bothered. But think about this. Well, whenever it was a Tea Party protest, press swarms. Oh my God, the right wing is protesting. The right wing is so important. What do they want? Let's give it to them. What do they want? Let's cover it like there's no tomorrow, right? Oh, it's the actual American citizens with no power protesting. Oh, they have no power. Why would we cover it? The disdain of the mainstream media it's so gross, and it drips from their mouths every time they will dismissively talk about violent protesters when there is no evidence of that. You guys are supposed to be reporters. Don't you have any shame at all? By the way, where are they getting that talking from? They're getting it directly from the CEO of this company. Here, let's go to video 7 here. Here's Warren again.
And what happens to the protesters at that point? The ones that I've spoken to said that they are not going anywhere and that they are building shelters for the winter and they're going to wait this out.
The people of the state of North Dakota are generally wonderful people, law-abiding, nonviolent people, and they're trying to go about their lives. This has been such a disruption to that state. This is not a peaceful protest, so if they want to stick around and continue to do what they're doing, great, but we're building the pipeline.
Wait, how is it not a peaceful protest? And he's like, oh, the good people of North Dakota, their lives have been disrupted. What are you talking about? We've been there. There's nothing around there. It's not like there's a shopping mall there. It's not like there's houses around there. No, all there is the reservation and then now the protests of your pipeline. The only thing that has been disrupted is your profits. This guy's worth $3.9 billion. But no, he's got to get to $4.1 billion. So he's going to take those peaceful protesters and smear them. What happened? I thought Donald Trump was talked about how we got to change the libel laws. You know, you just called a bunch of people there non-peaceful when, in fact, they've been perfectly peaceful. Are we going to go to court over that? No, I got to make more money. I got to make more money. So and he says, they will not stop our project. That's naive. They're not stopping our project. The disdain that they have for the rest of us is immeasurable. Okay, so let me just add one thing to this.
Sure.
Okay. So check out more on TYT Politics. Jordan's been covering it for a long time. There are a lot of great videos showing what's actually going on the ground. Mark Kopp, who's been on our show, and hundreds of veterans in support of Sioux Nation. How badass is that? That is super cool. Now, they are adamantly nonviolent, of course. Democrats. You think they're only taking from liberals? No. All the guys who trust the government, the guys, if it's a Republican government, the guys who trust giant corporations.
We're very excited. I'm feeling aggressive.
We got great accounts
Steve-O,
for you.
my
Come and
aggressive
see.
progressive partner.
Oh yeah, you want to hand off power to Trump and the Republicans? Oh, wonderful! Come and see. Come and see.
That's right.
So don't cry when they rip you off, because that's what's
we got
coming.
great
next.
comments last week on our show about.
All
how
right,
good
let's take a
Malcolm
quick
was.
break.
So,
When we
yes,
come
we
back,
people wanted you to be a regular member.
stuff
I don't think
happening
you've earned
in
it
prisons
yet,
in
but,
Milwaukee. So I'll tell you what when we come back.
Am I insufficiently aggressive or progressive? You're
All right, back on the Young Turks. I got a lot more anger coming at you guys.
Okay, more aggressive. Okay.
So, including
thanks
on
for
the
being
issue of
here.
economic
I'd like to
terrorism.
say
That's
your
the
name,
story that
Malcolm
I think is
Fleischner, 'cause it
amazing.
reminds me of
Coming
a
up in
kid
a little
when I
bit.
read
Okay,
Butter.
so Dan Quarterbine writes in, how can there be
Fleischner
law and
was
order
my
if there is
brother.
no
That's imitation
justice?
butter, and I'm an imitation
Indeed. We'll be seeking
All right,
a
we
lot of
got a
justice
lot of
going
great
forward,
stuff
trust
coming
me.
up on the show
Tom
today.
Mahadi writes in,
Here's my camera.
if I were trying to drain a
So what we're
swamp,
gonna
I
cover, we're gonna
wouldn't
talk
fill
about
my
Martin
entire
Luther
crew with
King
reptiles.
And what
saying.
What does it mean when they say the Santa Clausification of Martin Luther King?
Tom Sherry says, America doesn't look like a liberal
Malcolm has a
democracy
great story
anymore.
coming up about
It's devolving into a
Afghanistan. What's that
corporate
story
police
about?
state.
It's not really
Unfortunately,
even
there's
a
some
story.
truth
It's
in
a
that.
discussion.
In
A
fact,
reminder that the
that
Afghanistan
economic
war is
terrorism
still
story
going on.
is
I know.
partly
Are you
about
kidding
that.
me?
Yeah, it turns
And
out.
finally, Monkey with a
Whoa!
Spoon
That's some
says,
good reporting
Yeah,
already.
we've been there what? 3, 4, 5 years
fun.
now? It's
Jordan
at
Charton
least
is the most
maybe
legendary
more.
reporter there is.
So Barack Obama,
Absolutely
when did
no
he start
fucking
this
about with
Afghanistan?
this
Oh, but
dude.
he had it already.
Okay.
And then he kept it going
YouTube.com/TWT
for 8
politics.
years.
But I want you to know something.
That
If
is
you're a member of the Young
presidents
Turks,
will keep us in
you
Afghanistan?
deserve credit for every story Jordan
Well,
does.
we're going to find out
Because
later.
Funny
you
if Trump
paid
gets
for
us out of
it. Okay,
Afghanistan. I mean,
you're his
somebody's gotta get
boss.
us out at some point.
You asked
We've been
them,
there for
us to
16
hire
fucking
him.
years.
You asked him to
No,
go
we're
cover
still in
those
Korea.
things. That
Oh,
was
you're
you.
right. Maybe we don't have to get
Yeah.
out. You're right. We're still in Germany, Korea,
Yeah.
and Japan.
Yeah.
All right, so let's get to our, and then we're going to close with a story, and this is the story that I spent most of the day putting together. It's about Betsy DeVos. She's the boss now of education, and she had her hearings. So we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about the corporate Democrats' ties to her in a way that will make you as pissed off as I am. Okay, so we're going to get to that. Of course, we're going to talk about Cory Booker, and we're going to get to that. But right now, we've been taking a lot of heat, or I don't know about you, Steve and Malcolm Fleischner, but I have been taking a lot of heat for continuing to call out the corporate Democrats like Cory Booker. And a lot of people keep saying to me, hey, why can't you focus on Trump now? The election's over. Why are you still focused on the corporate Democrats? Because A, I can walk and chew gum at the same time, and those two things are inextricably tied together. You can't get rid of, if we get rid of Donald Tanahans and the Republicans, what are we left with? We're left with the corporate Democrats who gave us a system where half the country is poor, 33 million people still don't have health care. Obamacare rates went up 24% a month before the election. So we got to keep our eye on the ball. We can do two things at once. Bernie Sanders can do two things at once. I can do two things at once. But here's the thing I want to make the point before we get into the Martin Luther King story. After the primary was over and all through the summer, I heard nothing but Hillary Clinton supporters screaming, we're going to hold her feet to the fire after the election. We're going to hold her feet to the fire after the election. The election's over. I'm holding the corporate Democrats' feet to the fire, and those same people who promised they were going to hold the feet to the fire are now telling me to cut it out. Just so you know what's happening. Those people who promised that they were going to hold the corporate Democrats' feet to the fire if Hillary Clinton got elected. Well, she didn't get elected, and now I'm still holding their feet to the fire, and they want me to shut up. So they were full of shit then, and they're full of shit now. They ain't never holding anybody's feet to the fire anytime ever. So just keep that in mind. That's what we're going to do with the Jimmy Dore Show, and that's what we're doing at the Aggressive Progressives. We're holding everyone's feet, because if you're playing, I had Thomas Frank, who wrote Listen Liberal and What's the Matter with Kansas. He was on the Jimmy Dore Show this week, and I was reminded of a quote from that book where he said, those people who are still playing the Republican versus Democrat game are engaging in an ancient ritual that hasn't made sense since the 1980s. So just keep that in mind. Pretending that the Republicans and Democrats are the problem, the difference, and they need to fight each other, that you are now engaging in an antiquated ritual that hasn't made sense since the 80s. All right, so it's us against them. It's progressives against them. That's who this is. Go ahead, Steve.
Yeah, so, I've seen a lot of tweets and angry voices on the left. They say things like, when you're spending more time attacking Cory Booker than Donald Trump or Betsy DeVos, then you should really consider, which side you're on. And it is such simplistic thinking, because if we don't attack the Democrats, the corporate Democrats who purport to represent us, if we don't attack them from the left, and they're only being attacked on the right, by the right, well, how are they going to move? They're going to move to the right.
That's correct.
Okay, so if the left never ever holds our politicians accountable because we say, well, they're the lesser of two evils, and we always pretend that there isn't a problem with them, that what they're doing to further corporatize America is fine, well, the problem there is that they're going to keep drifting right.
Which is what happened.
Which is what's happened for the last 30 years.
So let's not pretend that the Democrats aren't Republicans from the 90s.
It's such a losing strategy, and it's really so unprincipled to say that just because someone is on our side, whatever that means anymore, just because there's a D next to that person's name, that we should attack them. That's crazy to me.
That's
a lack of
what
clear
gets you
thinking. That's a lack of principle, and that's what gives you a giant L at every election. You lose.
So you know what that gets you also? That gets you the Democratic Party wiped out at every level of government, from the State House to the Governor House to the Congress to the Senate to the White House. Wiped out!
Supreme Court,
wiped out. So if you want to keep going with the wipeout that these corporate Democrats, so what is the legacy of Barack Obama? The Democratic Party is fucking wiped out. That is the legacy. And don't think about anything else, because that's the legacy. Malcolm, you have anything to say?
Well, what this reminds me of is when, as a progressive, you criticize the United States foreign policy and you say we shouldn't be doing horrible things in Central America, we shouldn't be doing, supporting dictatorships and so on and so forth. And people come back and say, well, what's happening, what Iran does is worse, or what happens, Saudi Arabia is doing is worse, and what about Russia and Chechnya or whatever? And I have no impact over what Russia does or what the Saudis do or even Israel. I mean, I'll criticize them, of course, but the United States, I pay taxes to the United States government that carries out these policies, and I have some capacity to influence the United States government policy. I have no influence over what Vladimir Putin does. But, so when I speak to Democrats, and I say, you're being too weak, you need to stand for something, you need to stop taking corporate money. And they say, no, you don't understand, this is how we win, we're going to triangulate and so on and so forth, this is Bill Clinton, yada, yada, yada. They don't like it. I know they don't like it. But I can have an impact on them. We can have an influence over the corporate Democrats and the Democratic Party, which is why they want us to shut up. If it were pointless, they wouldn't care.
That's exactly right, Malcolm. If it was pointless, they wouldn't want us to shut up.
And everybody, this is universal, everybody hates being attacked from the left. I don't like it. There are people who are to the left of me. I'm an aggressive progressive, but there are people to the left of me, and I don't like it when people say you're not progressive enough. But the people who really hate it are the corporate moderate Democrats who are not progressive, don't really care, but they'd rather take the money. But when you call them on it, that's when they get super angry because they know it's true.
Yes, and so we've learned through this past election that when you out-left somebody and they don't like to be out-lefted, they can't attack you on policy, so what they do is they smear you. And that's what they did to Bernie Sanders. They're still doing it, by the way, still writing articles that, there was literally an article written that said that Bernie Sanders introduced the drug reimportation bill from Canada, which would make our drugs cheaper, literally said he did that to embarrass Cory Booker. Can you believe that somebody said that? And let me tell you, I'll take the heat. I'll take the heat for waking people up to the corporate Democrats. You can call me a Kremlin or a Trump supporter. You can call me a divisive. You'd say I'm being too divisive for holding people's feet to the fire, which you promised you would do. You can knock me down, spit in my face, slander my name all over the place. You can do anything that you want to do, but honey, lay off of my shoes. Don't you step on my blue suede shoes. These are my blue suede shoes. Don't step on these motherfuckers.
And Jimmy, that's an excellent point.
But you know what? Okay, when you said you can slander my name all over, I was like, wait a second. I think I know this song.
I think I know where this is going. But how dopey is Cory Booker to let Bernie play him like that? And he played right into his hands, Bernie, he only did, because he didn't really want it to pass.
No.
He didn't care. He was just trying to embarrass Cory Booker, and Booker just walked right into his trap.
Oh, yeah. That's what Bernie just goes around setting traps to embarrass people. That's what he's all about. He's not about trying to help the country or get cheaper drugs for poor people. All right, so let's get to our first story. So I wanted to make all those. So you know how this works. You get the first part of the show for free, and then we do the rest of the show. We're doing a 90-minute show today, so it's an extra long show. So if you want to get the rest of it, you go to tytnetwork.com/join. So it's tytnetwork.com/join. And if you're already a member, you go to tytnetwork.com/memberslive. Okay, that's how you get the whole show. Okay, so now we want to talk about Martin Luther King Day. Just the other day, last week, and was that this
Monday.
week?
This week,
That was Monday.
This past week.
Whew. So many things.
You're
happening.
so excited for the Trump inaugural, which is coming. You're like, can't come fast enough. For you.
My head is. I couldn't get a dress. They're all out.
Yeah.
I couldn't get a dress. All right, so there was a great article by Zaid Jilani, if that's how you say his name, in the Intercept, and he was talking about Martin Luther King. And what I love about Martin Luther King is that he was a radical, right? So people don't remember. Well, now because everything that he wanted, we all see in retrospect in our rearview mirror, it makes sense. It's like common sense. But at the time, he was a radical. In fact, here's one of my favorite quotes from him. He said, "Again, we have deluded ourselves into believing the myth that capitalism grew and prospered out of the Protestant ethic of hard work and sacrifice. The fact is that capitalism was built on the exploitation and suffering of black slaves and continues to thrive on the exploitation of the poor, both black and white, both here and abroad." Woo, that is some pretty radical shit.
That goes to the core of Martin Luther King's philosophy. And I want to back up for a moment. The reason why I love this article so much is that we tend to see Martin Luther King now as a consensus builder, a moderate, who made compromises to advance racial equality in America. And we see Malcolm X as like the crazy radical. It's not true. They're both radicals. Martin Luther King was a very anti-establishment radical. They just had a different method, a different tactic to get to where they want to get to. But Martin Luther King stood for much more than just bringing about racial justice in a segregated South. He was for so many things that are for all humans, that are universal, and he cuts to the core of so many of these great issues. And Jenk and I and our friends, every year we go away for Martin Luther King weekend to do a guys trip, and this year we're in Charleston. So Charleston, South Carolina is a place where I believe like 80% of slaves came into Charleston. It was the capital of slavery. And in 1850, it was the richest city in America because of the slaves.
Oh, no kidding.
It was built on the backs of slavery with cotton farming and also rice farming and just the selling of slaves.
It was the South's major port city.
Yeah.
So everything, all that cotton, everything came and went through, not everything, but the majority came and went through Charleston.
Yeah. So Martin Luther King is correct. So now we don't have slaves anymore, and we don't have Black Americans or African Americans enslaved in the way they used to be. But it's a different form of slavery.
Economic slavery.
It's an economic slavery that extends to basically everyone who's poor. Okay, so you can be, Mexican. You can be white. We saw Nick Smith and his community in Dickinson County, Virginia, and they're suffering. So it transcends race, and of course, it disproportionately affects Blacks and Latinos. But the real problem is, it really impacts all poor people. This is a class issue, it's a status issue. And I just want to revisit Dr. King's message because it's so much grander and so much bolder and so much more beautiful than what we give him credit for.
So let's go ahead and get to it. So here's the headline from the article. It says, "What the Santa Clausification of Martin Luther King Jr. leaves out." So the Santa Clausification of King, as scholar Cornel West calls it, is the portrayal of King as a celebrated consensus seeker asking for common sense racial reforms rather than as an anti-establishment radical. And it downplays the risks of one of America's most revered activists took to live according to conscience. Thank you, Malcolm. That's why you're here. King was not just a fighter for racial injustice, he also fought for economic justice and against war. And as a result, he spent the last years of his life before being assassinated in 1968, clashing not just with reactionary Southern segregationists, but with the Democratic Party's elite. and other civil rights leaders who viewed his turn against the Vietnam War and the American economic system as dangerous and radical. Many in the civil rights community warned King to focus on black civil rights and ignore the war so as not to alienate the Democratic Party.
Stop there. Okay, so this is exactly what they were saying about Bernie Sanders.
Exactly.
Exactly, right? They're saying, we need to go back to playing identity politics, and we have to quit with this, working class,
a critique of capitalism.
Correct.
Essentially.
And his critique of the system as it is. So let's stop doing that. Let's go back to identity politics. This is exactly what Dr. King's talking about.
Because the system's working for us corporate Democrats. We really like the system. We just need to tweak it, like privatize schools, privatize parks, privatize everything. We just need to tweak it and everything. Keep our health care privatized for sure, because the government-run program is the best one in the country, and we got to stop that shit. So there's a little bit more to this article. So they told him not to alienate the Democratic Party. And how did he respond to that? Well, he gave a speech at Riverside Church in New York City where he called the U.S. government the greatest purveyor of violence in the world and denounced napalm bombings and the propping up of puppet government in South Vietnam. He also called for a total re-examination of U.S. foreign policy, questioning capitalist exploitation of the developing world. So that's not what they wanted him to do. They didn't want him to do that. They said, shut up. They were telling him, shut up and just talk about civil rights. What do you know about the war? You're just a civil rights leader. You don't know foreign policy. So his response was, this is from that speech he gave. He said, for those who ask the question, aren't you a civil rights leader, and thereby mean to exclude me from the movement for peace, I have this further answer. In 1957, when a group of us formed the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, we chose as our motto, quote, to save the soul of America, end quote. We were convinced that we could not limit our vision to certain rights for black people, but instead affirmed the conviction that America would never be free or saved from itself until the descendants of its slaves were loosened completely from the shackles they still wear. Now it should be incandescently clear that no one who has any concern for the integrity and life of America today can ignore the present war. If America's soul becomes totally poisoned, part of the autopsy must read Vietnam. It can never be saved so long as it destroys the hopes of men the world over. So it is that those of us who are yet determined that America will be are led down the path of protest and dissent, working for the health of our land. That's some pretty ballsy stuff to say, especially back then, especially when he knew he was going up against the government, and the government that was kind of friendly to him in LBJ. He was going up against those guys, and he knew he was putting a target on his head, and he did it anyway, because it was the right thing to do, because what he wanted to do was save the soul of America, not save the Democratic Party, and not just save black people from poverty. He was trying to save the soul of America.
Because it all fits together.
It's all commingled and inextricably linked.
Yeah, and one of my favorite quotes is, injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. So you can't have like little slivers of justice here and there for little slivers of society. You have to have a just society that serves all. Otherwise, whatever advances you make in that one area gets destroyed. So he's a visionary. He could have said, look, I brought better conditions for black people. I fought for their rights and called it a day and declared victory. But he wasn't that man. He wanted true justice and peace for all of America, not just his people, for everyone.
And for poor people around the world.
And the Vietnamese.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, it's not a coincidence that when he started agitating against the war and talking more about economic justice, that he was killed. And in 1968 in Memphis, he was there to support the striking sanitation workers. That was the line that he crossed that apparently was too much. I actually also have a quote of his that I want to share. If we have that graphic, Ja'Cory, could you bring that up, Martin Luther King quote that I gave you? where he talks about, this has been going around a lot, this is where he talks
So
about,
he-
he talks about white moderate. Now, yes, he says, I must confess that over the last few years I have been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached the regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klanner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods. So this relates exactly to what you were talking about. And then right after that,
great quote.
David Brock called him a Bernie bro and told him to cut it out. But the themes are universal, and they are through lines in American history dating back to Martin Luther King to today. We're still fighting this fight, and we're still fighting Martin Luther King's fight. But a lot of the people who say they're fighting Martin Luther King's fight are not, and they don't want you to hear about this fight that he was fighting.
So this goes perfectly with what people are telling us now to shut up and quit going after the corporate Democrats. And what Martin Luther King was saying there, that even back then, it was the white moderate who was the impediment. We always know there's going to be a KKK and there's going to be racist, but it's the people who claim to be on our side that really step. And that's exactly right. That's what's and it's happening again, and people are doing this. So I just want to, I don't expect it to stop. I don't want people to expect to stop doing this to us. I just want to explain to our viewers what's going to be happening, and that it's already been happening ever since the primary. And before, right? They still call us Bernie bros. They still do that. That's unbelievable. So let's go back here. Here's the article goes on. It says King had long considered himself a socialist. In 1966, he told the staff at the Southern Christian Leadership Conference that, quote, there must be a better distribution of wealth, and maybe America must move toward a democratic socialism. That was him in the 60s saying that. Call it what you may. Call it democracy or call it democratic socialism, but there must be a better distribution of wealth within this country for all of God's children. The last years of King's life saw him escalate his campaign against economic inequality. He campaigned against the Oklahoma right to work referendum and warned that increased economic competition between whites and blacks would undermine civil rights, calling instead for a, quote, grand alliance between working class whites and blacks, which sounds very similar to some 75-year-old Jewish guy from Brooklyn saying the same shit. Wasn't he saying the same thing? And they wagged their finger at him?
He said the same thing. And in the video that we showed, it wasn't Nick Smith, but it was another guy, it was a union leader. He said the same thing. He was a white guy. And he said blacks and working whites work side by side. And sometimes it creates dissension because they're competing for the same jobs and for the same opportunities. But it also builds a camaraderie because they're working together and understanding each other's needs. And that's the whole thing. Again, it goes to the idea that we're in it together. We're in it together, so we have to help each other out. And Dr. King is totally right.
Right.
You can't advance the causes of African Americans only and expect to keep those advances, because they're going to get shredded if you don't have unity with other groups.
It's a class issue. It's a
class issue.
It's a class and economic issue. Let's finish the article. He goes on to say, Martin Luther King sought to use many of the same tactics he deployed in the South. Boycotts, sit-ins, blockades against economic injustice in inner cities in the North, where African Americans were trapped in endemic poverty. An article from the August 15th, 1967 issue of the New York Times writes up King's desire to dislocate large cities to force them to address these needs. The editorial board of the Liberal Times was less than pleased with King's choice of tactics. The Times called the proposed campaign a formula for discord and warned against massive civil disobedience, writing that once the spark of massive law defiance is applied in the present overheated atmosphere, the potentiality for disaster becomes overwhelming. So just so you know, the New York Times back then was shit, and the New York Times today is fucking shit. So fuck the New York Times, because they're always wrong and they lead us to every war we've ever been in. They were leading us into that war. They led us into the first Gulf War. They led us into this one. They printed bullshit, fake news above the fold on the front page. And the person who printed that shit got promoted to on-air talent at Fox News. Just so you know. And the guy who was right about the Iraq War, Chris Hedges, they made him leave the newspaper. All right, so let's just remember, this is the New York Times back then going after Martin Luther King. Why? Because he stood up for economic justice and against a war. Keep that in mind. Same shit happens today. They smear you if you stand up for economic justice and if you're against a war. They will smear you. Okay, let's finish this article. And his widow, Coretta Scott King, as well as fellow civil rights leader Ralph David Abernathy, went ahead with his plan. They built a camp. So I've skipped this part, but they built a camp in Washington, D.C. with tents, just like Occupy. The camp lasted 6 weeks until police moved in to shut it down and evict all of its inhabitants, pointing to sporadic acts of hooliganism as a justification. Andrew Young, the civil rights leader who later went on to be Jimmy Carter's UN ambassador and mayor of Atlanta, was horrified, saying the crushing of the camp was worse than the police violence he saw in the South.
That sounds a little bit like Occupy Wall Street.
Sounds just like Occupy Wall
Michael
Street.
Bloomberg was
doesn't it?
actually there taking notes.
Yeah. So we're the same. And it was a Democrat president then, Lyndon Johnson, the Democrat president in 2010 when they cracked the heads of the peaceful protesters in Zuccotti Park and all across the country, by the way, not just there. They had a $3 million lawsuit that the people of Los Angeles paid to the peaceful protesters because the cops abused them so badly. They made them kneel on concrete in parking garages until they passed out, urinated, or defecated on themselves. That's how we treat peaceful protesters in America, and that's how we treated them in the 60s. It's the same goddamn thing. But maybe I should be quiet because I don't want to be divisive around the stupid, fucking, worthless Democratic Party. I don't want to be divisive. We want to get on board with the people who want to screw us over. Don't you want to get on board with the people who want to screw you over? No. I'm going to fight the people who screw us over. I'm going to hold their feet to the fire like everybody said in the summer. I'm going to keep doing it. We're going to keep doing it here at the Aggressive Progressive. Because guess what? Telling the truth turns out makes you a fucking radical. Wanting to end the wars makes you a radical. Wanting economic justice and freedom from corporate control makes you a radical. I'll be a goddamn radical. I'll take the heat. Let's fix the goddamn country.
Yeah, and then a final note. If you purport to be a supporter of Dr. King, if you purport to believe in his ideals and you're on his side, you should understand what he really stood for. And you have an opportunity today to affirm his vision and his ideas. Because today we have a war that's been going on forever.
We've got a 16-year war.
And we'll get to that soon with Malcolm.
We got more than one, let's be honest. We got a bunch of them.
We have a bunch of wars. We have an economic system that is, probably definitely a lot worse than it was even back then.
Yes.
Much
worse.
It's crushing working class Americans of all races. So you have an opportunity now to fight on behalf of Dr. King's vision. So it's not just about, can black people sit at counters at restaurants down in the South. There's a lot more than that, a lot bigger than that. So it's your chance.
Okay, so we got to jump now. So this is the end of our free portion of the show, and we're going to jump over to the members only. So become a member so you can watch the whole show. I hate that we have to do this, but you got to turn the lights on, and you got to pay the camera people and all that stuff. So we got to make money, and we don't go to corporations to get it, and we don't go to vulture capitalists to get it. What do? We go right to you to get it. And that's how we can speak our minds. That's why I'm allowed to say this stuff here. I'm not allowed to say this stuff anywhere else in America. And I certainly wouldn't be allowed to say it on public radio. That garbage dumpster fire of fucking public radio. Are you shitting me? Jesus Christ. Does it come right out of the CIA? Where do they get their broadcasts from? Anyway, we got to jump over. Go to tytnetwork.com/join. tytnetwork.com/join. If you're already a member, you know what to do. Go to tytnetwork.com/members live. All right, we'll be right back.